I'd much rather be down there. Well, because I have marching orders this morning. Morning, everyone. It's still good to be in Sunday school. We've been talking about Exodus, and we're going to talk about Exodus again today in chapter 18. The in-laws show up. And while we're talking about that, and you're turning there, I came across something that I want to read to you to give you something to think about so you can get your brains and blood moving this morning. Listen to this statement, see whether you agree with this or not. It says, God is looking for those with whom he can do the impossible. What a pity that we plan only the things we can do by ourselves. What a pity. Let's pray. Father, this morning we thank you for the privilege of Sunday school one more time. Lord, we ask you to be here with us, to teach us, to point us in the right direction for this coming week, to give us the words of wisdom that only your Holy Spirit can provide. Lord, make us all teachers this morning and give us input, a positive input that will guide us and give us wisdom also through this coming week. Open our minds, open our ears, open our eyes, and give us the words of Christ. And everyone said, amen. God is looking for those whom he can do the impossible. What a pity that we plan only the things we can do by ourselves. Do we do that? And the time when we do that, do we also limit what God can do? Let me show you something that happened here when the in-laws showed up at Moses' place. Exodus chapter 18. Exodus is met by his father-in-law named Jethro, who also has been taking care of Moses' family, which Moses sent back to Jethro at some point probably prior to the Exodus, which would have been Zipporah and the two kids. They went back to Dad's house. And now they're meeting Moses back again as they're out in the desert. And apparently Jethro, the father-in-law, and Moses got along pretty well. So when I say the in-laws came, it probably wasn't a negative thing. You see all the time in movies and TV where they talk about the in-laws. You know, my situation with my in-laws was different than most, I guess, because I had a mother-in-law that probably was the person that kept Debbie and I together most of the time. Lucy, you remember her. Shirley was crazy. But I want to tell you something. For whatever reason, Shirley liked me. And there were times I got along with Shirley better than I did Debbie. Yep, true. And if Debbie and I got in a fight that lasted very long, Shirley would call me and say, why don't you come to dinner Friday night? I'll cook tacos. And that was enough to get me down to the house, and Debbie wouldn't even know I was coming. And when she showed up, or when I showed up, she'd get mad and walk down the hallway and go to her room, and Shirley and I would sit out in the kitchen and have a party. Well, that didn't last long before she'd get mad and come back and join us, and that usually brought us back together again. Shirley was a good gal. So when I read about this in-law stuff, I think about that. Verse 1, chapter 18 of Exodus says, Now Jethro, the priest of Midian, and a father-in-law of Moses, heard of everything God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. And I did some studying on this, Jethro being a priest of Midian. And I'm not really sure I understand what that means. There's many commentaries that talk about Jethro, and about half of them say that he was the priest of a idol-worshiping country called Midian. And the other half of those commentaries talk about Jethro being a priest of Midian that was truly idol-worshiping, but Jethro was not. He had found God. Interesting enough, Bob, Jethro, it appears, may have been one of the advisors for Pharaoh and left Egypt because another advisor, Balaam, had suggested that the Israelites should be enslaved by the Egyptians. Jethro didn't like that idea and exited Egypt because of it. That came right out of Jewish history. I didn't know that. Also, if you study genealogy back far enough, Jethro was probably a Levite's grandson, Kohath. So there's some interconnection here between Moses and Jethro. There's some interplay here. And one of the things that makes you think there may have been some issues between Jethro and the country, Midian, that he was supposedly a priest in. Do you remember when Moses met Zipporah, the oldest of 7 daughters? It was at a well. And there was a problem at that well. What was it? The people at the well weren't letting those girls water their sheep. It was because they didn't like them. This may have been an explanation as to why they didn't like them. Perhaps Jethro wasn't teaching or preaching the gods that they were used to dealing with. And they were ostracizing the girls and Jethro because of this. I don't know that that's the exact reason, but something was going on. This will come up in a minute. I want to show you why. Jethro shows up bringing Moses' family back to him, reuniting. And it says in verse 1 that Jethro heard of everything God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, and how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Jethro has known what's going on to some extent with the Israelites now. Verse 2, after Moses had sent away his wife Zipporah, his father-in-law Jethro received her and her 2 sons. One son was named Gershom, for Moses had said, I have become an alien in a foreign land. And the other was named Eleazar, for he said, my father's God was my helper. He saved me from the sword of Pharaoh. And in seeing the names of those 2 sons, you get some kind of a mindset as to where Moses' mind was during this period of time. Interesting enough, I did some studying on Jethro this week, and there is some stuff about him in there. Jethro shows us up in the Bible in several different passages with 7 different names. And each of those names gives some kind of an insight as to what Jethro was or wasn't, just as these names give an insight as to where Moses' mind was when he named these kids. So there is some insight there that you could see as this story comes together. Moses and Jethro sit down and have a talk. Verse 4 or 5. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, together with Moses' sons and wife, came to him in the desert, where he was camped near the mountain of God. Jethro had sent word to him, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and your 2 sons. So Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him. They greeted each other and then went into the tent. Moses told his father-in-law about everything the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and about all the hardships they had met along the way, and how the Lord had saved them. Moses expounds on the stories that are going around, the rumors that are going around of how the Israelites have been redeemed out of Egypt and led out of Egypt and saved from the Egyptians and guided by God. And it appears Jethro was impressed by this. Verse 9. Jethro was delighted to hear about all the good things the Lord had done for Israel in rescuing them from the land of the Egyptians. Verse 10, he says, Praise be to the Lord, who rescued you from the land of the Egyptians and of Pharaoh, and who rescued the people from the land of the Egyptians. Verse 11 is key, and I want to read this and talk about it for a minute. It says, Now I know. Now who knows? Jethro knows. Look what he says. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods, for he did this to those who had treated Israel arrogantly. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and other sacrifices to God, and Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law in the presence of God. Bob, if I didn't know better, I would read in verse 11 that Jethro has found something out that he didn't previously know. And that is, he says, I know the Lord is greater than all other gods. That sounds to me like a revelation that Jethro has had. If in fact Jethro was living in Midian, if he was living in Midian, and Midian was truly an idol-worshiping country, Jethro has found something out that's changed him. Something he's heard from Moses and the stories and the revelation that Moses is giving his father-in-law is convincing Jethro that even if there was some past association with idol-worshiping gods in Midian, this is a better way to go. How many times have we talked with people, dealt with people, and they finally opened their eyes and realized what you're telling me is better than what I'm doing now? It's a better way to go. It's an easier path. And they're making that decision, Lucy, based on the fact that you're giving eyewitness testimony as to what you have seen God do. Not hearsay. Eyewitness. Moses could look Jethro in the eye and say, I saw this happen. That has more weight, more meaning than hearsay, I heard this from Ruth. I saw this happen. And it had enough weight and consequence in Jethro's life to where he made that statement. This is a priest from Midian making this statement. I know that the Lord is greater than all other gods. For he did this to those who he had treated Israel arrogantly. he's also recognized something else, and that is that God apparently is working to the benefit of Israel. You mess with Israel, you mess with Israel's God. And I know, Sister Clerks, you've been to Israel, 4 times? Do you still find that if you mess with Israel, you mess with Israel's God? I don't think that's changed. I don't think that's changed. Vicky's given me my marching orders. I have to be finished by 10. She has a schedule to keep. Let's see, between Mike and Vicky and everyone else, I've got all this list of stuff I have to deal with this morning. Yes, let's hope he's on time. Speaking of ultimate schedules, let's read the next verse, because there's one here. In verse 12, Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and other sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders. They made a party out of this. You got Moses' family, you got Jethro's family, you got the elders of Israel. Everybody's there. And it was a good thing. Apparently they had a good time. Now, the next day is work day. And watch what happens. Verse 13. The next day Moses took his seat to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning till evening. Let's stop right there for a second. Do you know how we get into a routine? You get up in the morning, and the first thing you got to do is go get your coffee. Or in my case, it's changed now, but I used to have to go get the paper. Couldn't do anything else until you go get the newspaper, sit down with a cup of hot tea, and read through the newspaper for a few minutes. Till they quit delivering my newspaper. Still haven't forgiven them for that. Well, apparently, Moses had a routine. And his routine was to get up and go and sit in a judgment seat and serve as a judge for the people. And apparently these people had many disputes. You realize we're talking about over 1 million people here. So there was a lot of issues that came up between these people, and Moses is basing, it appears from what I can see, he is basing his government, if you want to call it that, on what he saw in Egypt. In other words, he was the guy. If there was a dispute, you went to Moses. If someone took something that you thought was yours, you went to Moses. If I didn't like what Connie wore to church today, you went to Moses. You laugh. But people fight over petty little stuff like that. And where do they go? They go to the authority. Can you relate? Can you also relate to Moses sitting there from morning to dark with everybody standing around him, waiting for him to make judgments either for or against them? And can you imagine Moses being exhausted from dealing with this every day? This is not a good system, and Moses is completely overwhelmed, if by nothing else, the sheer numbers of people that he has to try and judge over. Are you with me? Somebody say amen. There is somebody out here. These aren't cardboard cutouts sitting here. Verse 13, the next day Moses took his seat to judge, or to serve as judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning till evening. When his father-in-law, here comes father-in-law Jethro, when he saw all the people that Moses was doing, all that Moses was doing for the people, he said, "What is this that you're doing for the people? Why are all these people standing around you from morning to evening?" Now, this is a priest of Midian who may have been an advisor to Pharaoh. So he may have had some executive powers in another country. He may have had some organizational skills. Watch what he does here. This is Jethro. Notice this isn't coming from God. It's coming through Jethro. What you're doing for the people, why do you alone sit as judge while all these people stand around you from morning till evening? Verse 15, Moses answered him, "Because the people come to me to seek God's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me, and I decide between the parties and inform them of God's decrees and laws." Moses' father-in-law replied, "What you're not doing is not good. You and these people who come to you will only wear you out. The work is too heavy for you alone. Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. Teach them the decrees and laws, and show them the way to live and the duties they are to perform. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Have them serve as judges for the people at all times, but have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide themselves. This will make your load lighter, because they will share it with you. But if you do this and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied." Let's take that apart, because there's something there for us this morning. What are you hearing here? Jethro has identified a problem. What is that problem? We got one guy running the whole show, don't we? How's that going to work? Are the people happy? No. Judgments are taking too long. It's too hard to get to Moses. If he says, "I want to think about it," you know when you're going to hear from him. And there seems to be very little order, because they're standing around him from morning till evening, waiting to get to him to find out how to solve their dispute with their neighbor. Notice I'm saying with their neighbor. Not the guy from the country next door, amongst their own people. Let's talk about that very issue. because that's where I'm going. Jethro identifies a problem Moses has. He's spread too thin, isn't he? He's trying to be all things to all people. And he's finding out that it brings a lot of stress in his life. And he's not very good at trying to do all things for all people. Do you find there's some things that you're good at and some things you're not? Such as? But what if I don't have time to do that because I'm judging the people from morning to evening? Here's the problem. Moses was most effective at what? Leading the people. How did Moses know where to lead and what to say to the people? He got it directly from God, did he not? But now he's bogged himself down in being a judge to these people. And how long does his day last? Too long. Morning to evening. All day long, every day, he's a judge to these people that can't get along amongst themselves. And we're going to address that in a second. The problem that leaves is what? When does Moses have time to talk to God? Now, let's address Lucy's comment. Do we see that today? How so? Let's take that guy right there. They call him Pastor Mike. How about maintenance man Mike? How about fix the air conditioning Mike? How about the roof leaks Mike? Problem solver Mike? Counselor Mike? What happened to Pastor Mike? I went to a church a few years ago where they hired a guy to take over the day-to-day duties of the church. And he was a friend of mine. And basically, he was the nuts and bolts guy. If something needed fixing, if something needed changing, if there was a remodel going on, I knew him because of the signage. They wanted new signage. I never dealt with the pastor. I dealt with Phil. He was the guy. And what that did was allow Pastor Paul to focus his time on praying and studying the Word. In other words, he became just a preacher. Sister Clark, are you relating to me? No. You've been there, haven't you? And you lived it. And part of the problem was, in all of the time you spent fixing and doing everything else, It robbed you of your time to be the pastor. Because being the pastor means you're talking to God, you're getting direction from God, and you're coming here with God's words for you for next Sunday. And then we walk out the door and say, well, he didn't do that good a job that week, did he? Moses didn't do a very good job this week, did he? But Moses spent his time being a judge between people that couldn't get along. The net result of Phil taking over and running the church was Pastor Paul would show up on Sunday morning with some of the best sermons I've ever heard in my life. I still remember some of them. And they were effective. They were meaningful. It felt, Lucy, like he was preaching right at me. Because he had spent time with God. What are you laughing about, Sister Clark? Been there and done that? Am I relating to you? It's going to get better in a minute. I came with a message. Moses has got a problem that his father-in-law has seen after the first day he saw him at work. He said, you can't do that. You got to figure something else out. Well, let me tell you something, guys. It's one thing for you to fault me for my problems, but if you don't have a solution for them, it doesn't make much difference. Jethro has a solution. And that's the point. He didn't have time to do what God had called him to do to start with. Listen to what she just said. He didn't have time to do what God had called him to do to start with. Had he lost his focus? Had he gotten burdened down, Ruth, in the cares of the world's day-to-day goings-on? He was being pulled in a lot of different directions at the same time. And Jethro saw it. And Jethro says, you can't do this. This ain't going to last too long. So Jethro made a suggestion to him. The first thing he said was in verse 19. He said, listen to me now, and I'll give you some advice. And may God be with you. First, he says, you must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. What's Jethro telling Moses? Priority number one. You're a representative between the Israelites and God himself. Don't forget that. Number two, teach them the decrees and laws, and show them the way to live and the duties they are to perform. I want to stop here for a second. I forgot to put this in the computer. I want to show you something. Teach them the ways they are to live and show them how to perform. We have a situation going on today in our schools. Are we teaching people anymore how to live for God? As a matter of fact, we've taken God out of the schools. My granddaughter She came back from her computer training at school last week with homework that was talking about Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and what's going on in the streets. And there was no mention of God in any of that. This is in grammar school, guys. This is in grammar school. Look what Jethro told Moses. Teach them the decrees and laws and show them the way to live and the duties they are to perform. What would be accomplished by Moses teaching them the laws and the duties they are to perform? Perhaps some of these disputes between people that are going to Moses would not be happening at all because they have learned a different way. You see, education is important. I know of a CIA report that I saw on television. In Afghanistan, the CIA, good or bad as they are, one of their recommendations as they started to win the war was to put education in the schools, training people what America and who Americans are. They turned that down. So what did the Afghani people and the Taliban do? They put the education in schools and they tainted the kids against Americans. We didn't. Moses is being told right here, start the training early. Teach these people what they should be doing, and perhaps you would have less disputes for you to deal with it all. If we had God in our schools this morning, if we had gods in our high schools this week, and we taught God in college this week, perhaps they wouldn't be walking down the street, shooting each other and burning buildings down. And calling that protesting. That isn't protesting. That's lawlessness. That's not protesting when they burn my business to the ground. Jethro's telling Moses, teach them. Maybe that'll alleviate some of the problems you're having to deal with. Teach them. This is going on in our schools today, and we do nothing about it. Jethro told Moses, let's appoint staff members. Let's appoint people, select capable men from all the people, men who fear God. He gave Moses some qualifications that Moses needed to bear in mind in appointing these people. He said that they need to be men who fear God. And I'm going to come back to this word again because we've talked about it several times in Sunday school. Fearing God doesn't mean you're afraid of God. What is the definition of fearing God? Say it again. Respect. To hold in such high honor that you hold it in honor above anything else. Respect for God. Capable men. Trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, Those were qualifications for the men that Moses was to consider to appoint them as what? Judges. Judges. And what you see being set up right here in Exodus chapter 18 is the beginning of the American justice system. Because we use this today. We have levels of court and judges, just as he's advocating here. And then he advocated them in levels, Bob. He says, appoint them as officials over how many? Thousands. Another set of them over hundreds. Another set over 50s, and another set over 10s. So you could start at the lowest level and proceed up if you thought you needed to. You could appeal. And eventually, he says, have them serve as judges for the people at all times. But have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases they can decide themselves. Well, isn't that exactly how our appellate system works today in the judicial courts? This will make your load lighter because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you will be able to stand the strain, and all these people will go home satisfied. Is he not telling Moses, refocus? Get your priorities straightened out. You can't do everything. The word we use for in business is you want to micromanage everything. You can't do it all. I have a daughter that's very opinionated and organized. Imagine that. She came in last week, and they got on me because I don't write work orders up the way they want them written up these days. They're changing all this. And we've been extremely busy. And I was very busy Thursday when all this came up. And I tell you the truth, didn't want to hear it. And they were just insistent they wouldn't go away. They were just like a fly, you know how you keep, and it just doesn't go away. And finally I put my pen down and I turned around and I says, get this off your chest because I'm busy. And I don't write the work orders right. I don't put them in the right places sometimes. I don't put the phone numbers of some of the repeat customers on there because we call these people constantly. And they want all this put down. They want it done a certain way. And after they got done with all that, I had two options. I could either get mad and tell them all to go away, or I could listen to them and say, I'll try better and try and get them to go away. They didn't seem to have any problem doing that. And after I thought about that a little later on, I thought, you know, they're right with that because I'm spread too thin right now. They're asking to do more, but they want it done their way. The net result is, if it's getting done, and they're taking some of that load and doing the scheduling and talking to the customers, how hard is it really for me to change a couple of minor things? Is it better for me to do 100 things poorly or have 100 people do them and learn how to do them right? So what do you hear? You hear yourself analyzing all this just as Moses is having this being confronted to him right now. And what is Jethro telling him to do? Delegate authority. Find some people. Find some qualified people. And give them the ability to do what you're asking them to do. And then the hardest thing to do, Bob, is get out of their way and let them do it. And if they don't do it exactly like you did, that's okay. The net result may be better than what you hoped for anyway. But sometimes, and in Moses' case I can relate, the hardest part of this is stepping back. Let me show you how to do that better. Sometimes that works, sometimes that doesn't work. What is part of being a leader? In part of being a leader, Moses was forced to recognize some things. First of all, Moses has to recognize that God is recognized as the true leader. Moses is simply the instrument God is working through. Moses realized he cannot do this leadership alone. Moses realized that a special responsibility is needed for prayer and teaching. Even Jethro saw that. Moses realized that he must select, train, and give authority to others. Mike even realizes that, I hope. And people have a definite role in this. Let me tell you something that's so simple that I think we overlook. The leader has to have people to lead. If you run them all off, you're by yourself. And now you're no longer a leader by definition. You're a loner. He was told to get able men, such as fear God. They were to be men of truth and hating covetousness. And a judicial system was formed. Look at this. When you know who you are, that's some lesson we talked about a couple of weeks ago. You'll know what to do. Moses forgot who he was. God didn't call him to be a judge. God called him to be the leader. When you know who you are, you'll know what to do. Jesus came to this earth. Jesus starts his ministry. What's the first thing Jesus did? He went and found 12 people, didn't he? And what did he do? He invested 3 years of time in those 12 people, and then he turned them loose. And he gave them something to help them, the power from the Holy Spirit. As a matter of fact, he was insistent on them on the shores of Galilee and told them, don't even go start this until you go to Jerusalem and receive power from on high. And 12 of them changed the world because they were empowered to do so. So the question comes up, who do you empower? Jethro is focusing Moses' attention on a problem that Moses is even complaining about. And Jethro has pointed out to Moses, you need to empower some people. What do you need to do? You need to find people to empower. Let me say that again. You need to find people to empower. That start in your house? You know, Bob, in my case, maybe I'm a little unique or different. All the kids, you all know this, work at the shop. They've always worked at the shop. It's the only job they've ever had. Even my daughter-in-law, Josh's widow, still works at the shop. And you know, they do a wonderful job. Honest to God, they do a great job. They're very loyal. They're very good at their jobs, all of them. And they've been empowered to the point now to where you don't really have to call me to get something done. You're better off talking to one of them. So when I die, that company will go on because they've been empowered. They are the company now, not I. I'm the old man in the corner that doesn't write the phone numbers on the work orders. And you know what, Vicki? If they want to fire me and send me home, I'm okay with that. There's been many days I'd go home early. But let me talk to you Vicki, I have 5 minutes. Let me talk to you about this for 5 minutes. Empowering people. Listen to this. Your work doesn't succeed by what you do. Your work succeeds by who you empower. This sounds almost like a business seminar that John Maxwell would teach. Your work succeeds not by what you do, but who you empower. They're going to be the ones that carry this farther. They're going to be the ones that talk to the people that you're never going to reach, Lucy, because you're going to empower a 20-year-old that's going to talk to 100 people a day, and you're going to talk to 5. They're going to have the energy to carry that forward. So what do? You invest your time, your energy, and your knowledge in them. Just as Jesus did, and then he turned them loose. And when he turned them loose, they were totally committed and changed the world. Your work doesn't succeed by what you do. Your work succeeds by who you empower. You build people together, and you build something great. So the question becomes, when you start analyzing this, what can you give away? Moses had to give something away to get these judges started. What was it? Some of his authority. He had to back them up. He had to give them the authority to make the decisions they needed to make and trust that they made the right decisions. It said that he had to teach them. And he was looking for people with special qualifications. You need to ask yourself, what can you give away and who can you give it to? Because you want to invest your time. I look at this as an investment because that's kind of the way I think. I want to invest in people. And to be very frank with you, I want the biggest bang for the buck. If I invest my money in a stock, I want to see that stock climb and bring back dividends. If I invest my money in a person, I want to see that person succeed, get stronger, and bring back dividends. Can you relate to that? I texted out a message this morning. The Bible class on Thursday night. I told them there was a chance this might come on live today, and apparently it is. I texted them that this morning, and I'm getting text from them right now while we're talking, and they're watching. I've invested in them, and now they're starting to make changes in their lives or people's lives at work. They're reaching out because they found something that works. And they're telling people at work about it. You know about Diamond. She's in a cancer clinic now. Blake is in a truck driving position, and they come in at 4 o'clock and they sit around now and they talk about God after work. Are they all accepting Christ? Probably not. But he's planting seeds. That stuff, Lucy, I would never be able to do. It's reaching out. Who are you investing in? How long will you have to train and develop them? You can have control over your work, or you can have control over growth, but you can't have both. And D.L. Moody said it's better to set 100 men to work than to do the work of 100 men. So I'll leave you and challenge you with this. You need to go find someone that you can invest some time and empower and then turn them loose, because that is your legacy. And I'm done.